Hello, and thanks everyone for attending today's webinar. This is part of our Logistics Rewired series, and we're talking about preparing for the 2022 Harmonized Tariff Schedule update. Before we begin, we have a few housekeeping items. On your screen, you'll see a sidebar on the right side of the stage. If you need assistance at any time during the webinar, please message us in the chat, in the help chat located in that sidebar. You're welcome to ask questions, and actually, we very much encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar. Your questions are only going to be visible to us, and we're going to do our best to answer as many questions as you can. But go ahead and please ask as many questions as you possibly can. The ones that we are not able to answer will help us as we're continuing to go through the process of getting ready for this update. At the top of the screen, there's an additional tab that includes the presentation slides. So if you want to download them, you're welcome to download the presentation slides. We'll also be sending over the International Trade Commission publication, which is the basis for the change here in the US. We'll send that over in the public chat. And if you want to know how you can prepare for the HTS 2022 update, click the link that's in the chat, and that will allow you to download the concordance table. And we'll talk about that a little bit during the webinar, but the concordance table is the table with a listing of the current HTS classifications and the new 2022 classifications. We've put that in Excel format so that you can sort and search much more easily. So we've made that available to everyone. And then I also wanted to talk with everybody about our Forward 2021 conference. This is happening October 19th through 21st. It's going to be a virtual conference, and we'd like to invite everyone to join us there. This is our Flexport Forward 2021 conference, and a link will be sent via the public chat for you. An on-demand version of the webinar is going to be available shortly after the webinar concludes. We'll send you an email with that and with that link, and you should be able to download or rewatch the whole webinar. Let's see. I think that we have some legal stuff that we need to bring on there. And one of the things to keep in mind is that this webinar is based on the current situation, based on on what we know as of today. And it's not customized for any one particular company or any particular industry. This is a very general presentation, and we do plan on hosting another webinar later in the year, probably sometime in November, with more updated information as we learn more information. With that, I'd like to move on to introductions. And first of all, I am Tom Gould. I'm the Vice President of Global Customs here at Flexport. Along with me, I have Adam Dambrov. Adam is the Director of our Trade Advisory Team here at Flexport. And Marcus Eamon. Marcus is one of the managers of our customs brokerage team here at Flexport. And Marcus joined us because Marcus is actually leading a team of brokers here at Flexport. We have a team of, I think it's 10 brokers that are actively reviewing the update so that we can educate ourselves, so that we're prepared to educate all of you and all of our clients on this update. And with that, I think we can get into we're going to get into a couple of poll questions. Before we get started, we want to kind of get your thoughts on some questions. So the first poll question that we ask for you is, who handles your product classifications? So we want to know, do you do classifications in-house? Do you do them internally? Do you have some outside source, trade counsel, somebody outside the company that handles yours? Does your customs broker handle your classifications for you, or are you not sure? If you could answer those questions, that would be great. We'd like to kind of get that as a level setting, and we'll have one more poll question after this. But let's see. And once you do actually answer the question, you'll be able to see the results of the questions. And let's see, it looks interesting. So about 64% of the participants, it looks like, do their classifications in-house. Only about 10-11% outsource the classifications to trade counsel. 22% to their customs broker. That's great. And a few of you are still not sure about who does that. Not a problem. We'll talk about that as we go. Let's move on to our next question. And this question, one of the things that we're going to be talking about in a little bit is our recommended process for getting ready for this update. And one of the things that we recommend that companies do along with this process is conduct an audit of your product classifications. And now is a perfect opportunity for you to conduct an audit because we know that there's some changes. And that's something that we think is an important thing to do as throughout the life cycle, throughout the year. But what we'd like to know is, when did you last conduct an audit? Did you do one this year? Did you do one last year? Did you do one within the last 5 years? Or maybe you didn't audit classifications, or like the other one, maybe you're not sure if you have or you have not. So give us your answer, and would like to see what companies are saying that they do. Interesting with this poll. I find it very interesting that the numbers are spread out quite a bit. This year, 35%. So a third of you have actually done an audit this year, which I would consider to be an industry best practice, to do an audit of all of your classifications at least once a year. Within the last year is also reasonable. Within the last 5 years, okay, that's good, but we don't audit classifications, or I'm not sure. So if any of you fall into those last couple of buckets, now is a really good time for you to think about doing a complete audit of your HTS product classifications. Wonderful. Let's move on and let's get into the meat of the webinar. So we're going to talk a little bit today. We're going to start off by talking a little bit about the World Customs Organization and the Harmonized System and what that is. We'll talk about what's changing in 2022. We're going to go through a number of examples of product code changes, of classification changes, and then we're going to walk you through how to prepare, how we recommend that you prepare for the upcoming update. And then, like I said, Q&A. We'd really like to get you to pose your questions. We're going to answer as many of them as we can, but we know we're not going to get to all of them. And some of the questions that you're going to come up with are probably going to be questions that we don't know the answers to yet. And one of the reasons why we wanted to do this webinar and do it early is we wanted to set it up as a forum so that we could get questions from our clients and from importers so that we can continue our preparation. And like I said, we have a working group of about 10 customs brokers that are actively going through the tariff updates, and we're going to share all of your questions with them so that we can hopefully have answers, if not during this webinar, potentially at the next webinar that we're going to do later in the year. Okay, let's start off with, what is the World Customs Organization? The World Customs Organization it's an independent government, not non-government body, or they call it an intergovernmental body. So it's an independent body that has most of the countries around the world that are involved in international trade are members of the World Customs Organization. Their mission is to enhance the effectiveness and efficiency of customs administrations around the world. And one of the things that they do is they're the ones that actually publish the harmonized system. They're the ones that publish all of the notes and the section notes and chapter notes to the HS or the HTS. They're the ones that actually publish all of the headings and the subheadings up to the 6-digit level. And they make those available to the different countries around the world to use as they create their harmonized tariff schedules, which are often 10-digit numbers. The World Customs Organization also publishes the explanatory notes, and they do provide other methods of interpreting discrepancies in the harmonized system and the harmonized tariff schedules around the world. Let's move on. So what is the harmonized system? So the harmonized system is the like I said, is the 6-digit number, and it's the nomenclature that's been developed by the World Customs Organization of any types of products that could be imported. It's broken up into about 5,000 groups of commodities. And those are, again, the first 6 digits of the 10-digit HTS number that we use here in the US, that we use here in the EU, and we use in many countries around the world. It doesn't have to be 10-digit numbers, but most countries around the world use 10 digits for their harmonized tariff schedule. And the harmonized tariff schedule would be the country-specific schedules that are used around the world. So when I talk during this presentation, when I'm referring to HS, I'm generally referring to the World Customs Organization 6-digit code or system of codes at 6 digits. And when I talk HTS, I'm talking about the full 10-digit code that's used by each of the different governments around the world. Let's see what's next. So what's happening in 2022? So every 5 to 6 years, the World Customs Organization updates the harmonized system, and they do so to conform to developments in technology changes and to changes in trade patterns. The last time the HTS or the HS was updated was 2017, and one of my favorite examples from back then was typewriters. And prior to 2017, typewriters had their own HS heading, and in 2017 they were retired. The HS heading for typewriters was retired because people don't import typewriters. But there's constantly evolving and new and changing technology. So things like drones or 3D printers or smartphones, those are the new types of technology that we're starting to see in 2022 will have their own HS classification headings. So the plan is for the new codes to go into effect on January 1, 2022, and you'll be seeing some significant changes on how products are classified beginning in the new year. Marcus, you want to talk to us about some of the numbers?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So we're seeing 351 global updates being made with the 2022 edition. And this includes over 70 new headings and subheadings, 4-digit and 6-digit numberings as well. And in the United States, we're seeing over 1,500 US HTS codes being updated as well. So this could be a very simple change. Maybe it's a slight change in the numbering or how it's been organized before. But some of them, as we're going to get into, are actually pretty substantive, and they make a pretty large impact on several different commodities. So with that, let's kind of talk about which countries have already made updates. And the US was a little bit ahead of the curve. They published, the ITC published their recommendations to change the HTS a few months back. When we started this webinar, the US was really the only one, but Canada snuck in there a couple of weeks ago and published their changes that they're going to implement. We're still waiting on the EU. We're still waiting on Great Britain, Australia, China. They have not published their updates yet. But we would like to have an additional time where we can talk about those, and we'll try to address as much as we can at the international level. But there is going to be a bit of a focus to this discussion as it pertains to the United States. So where are we seeing the most impact? Here, based on where these changes are occurring, we're seeing the greatest number in Chapter 85, Chapter 44, and Chapter 84, all kind of seeing some major changes. And I'll go into a very slight amount of detail here, and maybe we can get further into detail in the Q&A portion. Chapter 85, we're seeing changes to display devices. We're seeing changes to smartphones. Those are now being provided for specifically in 85.17. We're seeing a lot of these changes that are affecting kind of more of these kind of mobile technologies that come in. So that includes, that includes the way that smartphone devices are and accessories are classified, as well as some of the component parts for them. Chapter 44 is one where almost every 4-digit heading in Chapter 44 has been affected in some way. We're seeing some changing definitions to plywood, but I think the more substantive change here that we're seeing is a greater focus on transparency of information about the trade of tropical woods. So one that we're seeing a lot of is there's a lot more provisions at the 6-digit level, at the subheading level, for products made of teak. And also other tropical woods. These woods aren't always known exactly where they're coming from, and it's a bit of a whack-a-mole game for customs authorities around the world to identify where wood products are coming from. Were they harvested in a sustainable way or not? And currently at the United States level, we do track a lot of this, and if you go deep into 44 at the 10-digit classification level, you'll see a lot of A lot of provisions for tropical woods and very specific species. The Tectona grandis is the most common variety of teak, and that's provided for in many places in Chapter 44 in the United States. We're going to see that now at the 6-digit level, so that we'll be able to track these changes of these wood species across the entire WCO system. Finally, Chapter 84, we're also seeing there an adjustment to, sorry if I froze there for a moment. Chapter 84, we're seeing a change where we're seeing 3D printers, which are called additive manufacturing machines. We're seeing big updates to 8462, which has some more industrial machinery and steel processing machinery. We're also seeing industrial robots now get incorporated into Chapter 84 as well. And so they're all getting their own breakouts and provisions. But let's go into a couple of specific examples that I think kind of characterize a bunch of different changes. One of the changes that I talked about is kind of a numerical change, right? Numbers that may have existed before, and some of them are pretty innocuous, like mushrooms. Right now, there's going to be a 6-digit breakout for shiitake mushrooms where there hasn't been before. That's pretty innocuous. There's not going to be a major change here. Some of these numerical changes are a little bit different. And if you've heard anything or any kind of rumor about, HTS 2022 prior to today, you may have seen that drones are going to get their own provision. They're called unmanned aerial vehicles, and they're now going to have their own provision in 8806. If you look at your HTS today, 8806 isn't a heading that exists. It's being created brand new for the purposes of unmanned aerial vehicles. We are also going to see some changes to more substantive ones. And this is where it's really great to have an advisor on your side who can look into these changes and kind of tell you what they mean. So not only is, some of the numbers are changing, but in 62, some of the chapter notes are changing. If you've been an apparel importer, you might know that woven women's shirts of heading 6206 have some ways to get out of 6206 into a cheaper heading of 6211. And that's based on whether or not they have tightening at the bottom or pockets at the bottom of the garment. We're now seeing that get applied in the chapter notes to men's shirts as well. So importers of scrub tops, for examples. This is one where we have pockets at the bottom of the garment. This, in 2021, this would be heading 6205. And if it was woven polyester shirt, you might pay 26% plus an additional charge based on the weight of the shirt. If you import this on January 1st, it's not going to be excluded by virtue of one of the chapter notes from 6205. It's going to go to an other shirt top of 6211, which would be about at least a 10% savings in duty, which is certainly something that a lot of importers would look for. Finally, we have some changes beyond just kind of a change in meaning. We're going one further level deeper here. So obviously, customs isn't the only agency involved in regulating imports. Another common one is, is PGAs, right? OGAs, other government agencies who somehow regulate imports or exports. One example of this are photovoltaic generators. The headings for these ones here in the left-hand side, they all have flags for dumping that are currently active right now. And if your broker was filing under one of these headings of a photovoltaic generator, they might see a flag and they'd reach out to you, the importer, and ask, hey, is this subject to this dumping order? The big question is, when these new products go to different headings, how quickly will the ITC be able to keep up with these dumping flags? Will it happen right away? Will it not happen for several weeks or months? What about FDA? These are some of the things where it really takes an informed importer or a diligent customs broker to look into and see, okay, where are these changes happening? How are they affecting it? And looking just beyond kind of the numbers or the things that might actually appear in the updates and in the linked publications that we have. So with all these changes happening here, I think it's good to kind of consider how should you approach it as an importer. And for approaching these questions, I'm going to turn the mic over here to Adam Dambrov, our head of trade advisory, to talk a little bit more about what kinds of things an importer can do to be prepared.
Thanks, Marcus. Appreciate that. So shifting a little bit away from how the changes will impact your current classifications and your current products, there's a lot of other things to be concerned about and to be thinking about now, well in advance of when the changes take effect January 1. And one of the biggest things that we're getting asked about, and we think it'll be interesting to see how the USTR implements changes to the 301 duties and the 301 exclusions. As everybody should know, the 301 duties and the 301 exclusions are closely tied to classification. And so if there's a modification to that classification, the exclusion may no longer exist in the automated broker interface. And so there may be some confusion about how to administer the 301 duties and the exclusions if there are changes to the HTS codes. As Marcus mentioned, it goes beyond just customs. Classification is also tied to your other government agency obligations. Specifically with respect to anti-dumping, remember that even though the classification may change, since it's the narrative scope description of the anti-dumping or countervailing duty order that controls, it means your product is still subject to dumping, even if there's a change in the HTS code and your broker says, whoops, there's no flag today. Your goods are still subject to dumping. So it's good to get in front of all this and get a sense of how this is all going to be administered. Another thing to consider, and another reason that we're urging all our importer customers and future customers to review this now, is because there may be an opportunity for you to ship more goods into the country now if your duty rate is going up. And alternatively, if there's a reduction in your duty rate, you may want to wait until January 1st to start entering more product. There could be a strategic savings opportunity there. And lastly, we just wanted to also mention that if you are relying on a customs ruling issued to your company or to another company, and that HTS code is changing, you may wish to seek modification of that existing ruling just to ensure that it applies to the new HTS codes and not some of the stale codes that may be listed in a ruling. And so what are we recommending to everybody on this webinar today? First and foremost, as Tom mentioned early on, it's critical that you begin with confidence in your existing classifications to your product database or however you store your product classifications. In order to correctly see what the changes, how the changes will impact your business, you need to start with an accurate classification in the first place. It's very similar to technology implementations, bad data in, bad data out. You need to make sure you're starting from a position of confidence. Then number two, begin mapping your old codes to the new 2022 updates, and also reviewing any changes into those particular chapter or general notes that may impact your product. As Marcus mentioned, at least a few definitions are changing, and that could potentially impact your classifications. And then once you get a sense of where you'll be, check to see if the new changes are going to have a positive impact or a negative impact. And lastly, you should also be reviewing any past customs rulings that you've had issued or that you rely upon significantly in order to get those rulings modified.
Wonderful. That brings us to the end where we have some time for Q&A. Like we said, we really wanted to spend a good majority of our time during this webinar answering your questions. So please go ahead and post your questions in the chat, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. And I see that we've already got a few that have started coming in. I'm going to actually ask a question of Adam just to kind of dig a little bit deeper into a couple of the areas, or actually both Adam and Marcus dig a little bit deeper into a couple of the areas that we talked about. Adam, you mentioned about the 301 tariffs, and we know that the 301 tariffs are tied to the actual HTS number. In other words, the way that we know what products are and what products are not subject to the Section 301 tariffs is they specifically name an HTS number. Now, when the new tariff goes into effect and we have products that are no longer classified in that HTS number that was named in the Section 301 tariff provision, and now that product has a new 10-digit HTS number and maybe even a new 4, 6, or 8-digit number below it, do we know what is going to happen with those come January 1? Are they actually going to no longer see the Section 301 tariffs applied to them?
Great question, Tom. I have not found any indication of what the USTR is intending to do with respect to these HTS changes. As many people know, we closely monitor the USTR's activity around the Section 301 duties, and we have not heard much of anything from the USTR with respect to A, the 301 duties themselves, and B, how these HTS tariff changes will be implemented.
Great. Then Marcus, I saw on the slide that you did with the scrubs that you showed that there was a change from 6205 to 6211, but I don't see that in the concordance table. Why is that?
That's because the concordance table only has the actual changes to the numbers, and they have some suggestions about what the old one was and where the new ones are going to go. And you might see indicators that it could go to here, and you could see this, parentheses PT saying partially some of things will go here, some things won't. But what that concordance table doesn't tell you is these questions of chapter and section notes. And what's happening with that shirt example is that we're actually seeing the chapter notes change. And so it's beyond just kind of, we're fundamentally changing what is a shirt for 6205. We're not just changing numbers around like we saw with the example for the drones, which we pointed out earlier.
So we can't 100% rely on that concordance table. You really do have to look at the rest of the changes as well. Wonderful.
That's correct. Yep.
Thank you. So let's see. The next one is, will there, this came from the participants. Let's see, will there be a grace period for companies to update their products? As in, if we have used the same code for X many years, how will these changes be handled with customs if the unit headings are now changed? Does either one of you want to take that question? Is there going to be a grace period?
Well, I think functionally there could be. It kind of, as we've seen with a lot of the updates of Section 301, these have to kind of go down a couple of different technology trees, right? It has to go from the ITC proposal, and then that has to be then approved by Congress, and then once, or by the president. Once that the approval does go through, then it goes back to CBP, who then has to talk to their programmers to then implement those changes. If that process isn't actually completed until maybe late in the year, if these aren't officially formally approved until late December, we could see a bit of an issue there when it comes to actually applying the new ones on January 1st or still using the old ones. So technically, probably no, there would not be a grace period, but practically, in the sense of actually clearing things, it relies on how quickly customs can make their updates and put that into into API providers.
And let me share a little bit of experience from the last couple of times that this has happened. So in the US, I don't remember, I believe that the US last time got it done on January 1, meaning they had the law in place and everything in place, and the change went into effect on January 1. And it was a hard cutover on the date that it was published. And I would say that countries around the world, different countries around the world, are going to potentially have different dates. A lot of them are going to shoot for January 1, but we may not see January 1. One of the other things that I do remember, and I actually just remembered it when I saw this question, so thanks again for asking this question. On the export side, the HTS number is used as the basis for the Schedule B number for exports out of the US. And my recollection was in 2017, the export Schedule B, there was actually like a month or a 3-month period where you could use either the old number or the new number. So there was a grace period on the export side, but not a grace period on the import side. Thank you. The next question: approximately when do we expect to see the EU changes? And I might even add to that: when do we expect to see other countries? Do we have any indication of that?
Not really. What we have heard from previous times, like when this was done in 2017, is that the EU got this together sometime in October. So we're casually expecting sometime perhaps around then as well for the EU. They generally seem to be pretty straightforward. UK is a little bit harder to predict with Brexit. In some ways, maybe it could be even faster or easier, or in some ways it could be far more complex. I'd say that when it comes to your British update, that's really anybody's guess. Maybe they're going to be ahead of the curve or well behind, and we'll have to find out. China has been very tight-lipped as well. They haven't given any indication about how or when they're going to make those changes, and nothing really from Australia, although they historically have also made their updates out in October.
So a couple of thoughts on that is, one is, I mentioned a couple of times, I think, that we have a team of brokers that are looking at these updates. And I've asked Marcus to include brokers from our EU office, our Canada office, so that we can make sure that we're going to be able to have these global. And we are actively watching out for these. So make sure that check back with us, because we'll continue to update as we hear more about that. Wonderful. Here's a question, actually, I think maybe for Adam, for you. Can Flexport provide new US codes for us today?
Yes, we could. Yes, we could. So if you have a list of HTS codes, you want to see how they would be mapped for the 2022 implementation, then we could absolutely help you with that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Adam. That's great. Another question is, let's see, are there okay, and there are multiple questions, sure. Is there a cheat sheet that enumerates the changes? Marcus, do you want to talk a little bit about the concordance table that we have available? And I believe that there's a link to it in the chat here so that you should be able to download right from this webinar. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the concordance table is a great place to start. That will kind of give you a guidepost about where things are now and where they could go, post January 1st. In terms of actually providing a cheat sheet, this is something that with Adam's team, we've been working on assembling kind of not just like what the changes are, but what the changes mean. And that's really how we've kind of dug into this. We're a little bit behind schedule where I would have preferred, but we're still just about halfway completed through all the the changes to the US HTS over the 1,500 some. So we're definitely closing in on getting that together, that is something that will be potentially provided by the advisory team. But this is kind of for Adam's show to run here. So Adam, if you had any additional commentary on that, please go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you, Marcus. Yeah, the changes are quite extensive as Marcus laid out. So it's definitely challenging to try and create a short form or a desk mat or something like that that shows the changes really simply. What we could do it is for your specific classifications. If you're interested in a particular subheading, we could lay it out, or particular changes to the chapter notes or something like that. We could summarize that for you, but the changes really are, even the administrative tweaks here and there, it's really quite extensive. It's 480 some odd pages you'll see in the publication that we circulated. I am hopeful that come late November, early December, that we have some tools at our disposal that allows us to use technology to quickly type in one HTS code and then see what the changes might be. But at the moment, that's still a work in progress.
Yeah, when I saw this change come out, that's one of the reasons I asked, Marcus to set up a team of brokers and worked with Adam to really start our preparation for this. What we realized is that the changes are pretty significant, and there's a lot of changes that are not apparent in the publications that came out from the World Customs Organization, from the ITC, and even if we look at like the changes that came out from CBSA in Canada, there are so many issues that are related to the changes that we're trying to understand. So, for example, it's one thing to know that a code changed from A to B, but then what did that do to the duty rates? What did it do to special duty rates that are associated, like the Section 301 or the 232? What does it do to free trade agreements? And that's something that we really haven't touched on that closely, and that is what does happen to a free trade agreement when you have, let's say, for example, Marcus, the drones, where they were classified in 8801. And if you look into maybe the US Korea Free Trade Agreement, there's a provision and there's a rule of origin for products classified in 8801. But if you look at that free trade agreement, there's no rule of origin for products classified in the new provision 8806. So what's going to happen there? Marcus, Adam, maybe both of you want to comment on what should companies that use free trade agreements do when dealing with their products whose classifications have changed?
Yeah, I think in the short term, there will be, hopefully longer term, there potentially will modify the text of those agreements so that they match the correct HTS codes. But I think that might be asking a lot. I think most likely what will happen is you'll just have to simply show how the 2022 change is essentially the same. It's just a tweak to the statistical suffix or something like that. And just to demonstrate that, hey, this is just a numerical change. It's not a substantive change. My good still qualifies. But we shall see how that happens, because it'll definitely create some confusion.
Great. One of the things that I know I've seen in the past when this has happened is companies actually had to classify their products twice. They classified it under the current schedule for determining the duty rate, but then they classified it based on the prior schedule to determine what rule of origin. Because the rules of origin, while they use the HTS numbers to determine which rule of origin applies, each free trade agreement says in the agreement, and the countries among the agreement agree on which version of the tariff schedule will apply. And so it's important to know, if you're dealing with a free trade agreement, which agreement or which version of the HS is used for classification and which version is used for the qualification of the goods for the free trade agreement, and they don't have to be the same. You have other issues that we kind of touched on a little bit, but remember, when you look at the classification changes, as Adam mentioned, there's changes to PGA flags. So it may be that there are new codes that are not flagged for food and drug requirements or different government agency requirements, but they may still apply, even though the product classification is not flagged for that other government agency. Similarly, as Adam mentioned, with anti-dumping and countervailing duty, though those new numbers are not going to appear in scope rulings that have already been issued, because there's no plan to update those in mass. So as you go through and you do your update to your classifications, you have to think ahead multiple steps. It's almost like playing chess. You have to think ahead. Okay, I've changed my classification. Now what's next? What's the duty rate? And what's the implication of that? What's the other requirements that are out there? Let's see. The next question, are the additional tariffs President Trump added to China imports still in effect for 2022? Do either of you want to try to address that question? Because I think that's a really good question, and it's one that I haven't heard a lot of discussion on. And honestly, I don't even know if we have an answer. I think we're more going to give you some of our speculation.
Yeah.
Yes. Marcus, I think I'll jump on this one.
Sure.
They currently remain in place, with the exception of certain exclusions that were granted on products that are deemed essential to the response to the pandemic. And so those exclusions were extended until September 30th. There's currently an opportunity to request that those extensions be extended. But for all other items on list 1, 2, 3, and 4A, the Section 301 duties on goods from China are still in effect. $1 million question that everybody would like to know the answer to is what is the Biden administration going to do about the Section 301 tariffs, along with the USTR SI? They've not really given much information about it. I think we were all hoping that now, as we're coming into the end of Q3, that we would see some kind of response from the USTR or the president, and there really hasn't been much at all. The only thing they've indicated is that the tariffs provide leverage in the negotiations, and that there's no incentive to remove that leverage. We've got a little bit of information saying that they are looking at reopening the exclusion process, and they are looking at considering reinstating some of the exclusions that were previously granted that expired in September and December of 2020. But we haven't heard anything concrete at all. In fact, the most recent information we have is that now the Biden administration is considering additional investigative action against China for its practice of providing subsidies to Chinese companies. And to Tom's point, it's pure speculation. But if anything, that to me sounds like they're looking to increase the pressure on China rather than decrease it. But all that being said, I do believe at some point the USTR will provide an opportunity for importers to get refunds on prior exclusions. And I do think that they will open an exclusion process for importers to request exemptions from these tariffs going forward, and that process will, in theory, be a lot clearer than what was administered under the Trump administration.
Wonderful. next question is kind of a general one, and where do we go to stay updated with these changes as they evolve? Well, I think the fact that you've come here to our webinar is a good place to start. Like I said, we're planning on doing another webinar probably in November, where we'll have more updates on that. Keep reaching out to us. We should be able to help you if you like. If you want to have us take a look and help you stay up to date on products that are specific to your company, the products that your company deals with, go ahead and reach out to us and we'll be happy to talk with you about that. Any other thoughts about where companies can go to stay updated as these changes evolve?
Yeah, it's going to sound simple, but the USITC website, number one,
Yep.
The Federal Register, number two, and believe it or not, Google Alerts work wonders in keeping you updated on matters that are of importance to your business.
Good. Next question. With the current logistics delays, will the effective date of 1/1/2022 be the date of shipping or the date of clearing customs? Marcus, maybe you can address that for us.
Yeah, I see quite a few questions on this one. If I'm going to operate on the assumption that this will operate as it has done in the past, both for Section 301 and for any kind of annual updates to the tariff here. In general, duty calculation date is based on when the goods are in the United States, when the entry is presented to customs and released. So, one such example that can come up is, what if you have an exam hold, placed on December 30th, and it goes on for 3 to 4 business days, and meanwhile now it's January 5th, January 6th. Unfortunately, the classification you may have used in 2021 may no longer be valid by the time of entry presentation when the cargo is released in the United States in 2022. A general rule for importers out there, it's roughly when the cargo arrives to the United States. There's quite a bit more nuance to that, but as kind of a rule of thumb here, when does the cargo actually get to the United States, to the first port of arrival? That's really what's going to determine or drive a lot of the duty calculation discussion. There are ways that things can change it. If there's an IT, that will affect it, or an in-transit bond, that will affect it, or depending if there's an exam, and also when your broker files the entry. There's a kind of a confluence of factors that release it. But the one thing that you can do as an importer is try whatever you can to have things arrive to the United States Customs Territory before that date, especially if you know that you're going to be impacted by a higher tariff or some other effect. It might be worthwhile to explore options to expedite shipping faster, just to make sure it arrives in the U.S. Customs Territory before January 1.
So next question is, you mentioned that some of the changes are not apparent in the concordance table, and that some of the changes are in notes. Are there other examples that you know of classifications that are not in the concordance table, classification changes that are not in the concordance table?
Well, Tom, I think we actually found one together there in heading 5903, which is for coded garments here. And I know this is a realm of your expertise that you've been doing for decades. Perhaps I'd like to send it back to you. Do you want to talk a little bit about the laminated garments of 5903 and how that might affect other headings for apparel importers?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the things that we have to be aware of is that sometimes changes have ripple effects. And so what happened here is there's a change to the note that describes or that defines products that are classified in heading 5903. And 5903, I don't have my notes in front of me, are those fabrics that are coated, covered, or laminated with plastics or rubber or some other material. So think of your high performance, recreational performance, outerwear types of fabrics, rainwear types of fabrics, and things like that. Historically, the fabrics used to make those garments are classified in 5903 if the coating, if the lamination is visible to the naked eye. So if you had like a simple spray-on coating that you couldn't see because it kind of absorbed into the fabric, that would not be classified in 5903. And similarly, if you had a fabric that was laminated, so you've got maybe one layer of fabric, a layer of a plastic membrane, and then a second layer of fabric where you've got the three layers laminated together. The current rule, the current tariff interpretation says that that lamination layer has to be visible to the naked eye in order for the fabric to be classified in 5903. Under the new rule, that lamination layer does not need to be visible to the naked eye. And that makes a change to fabrics that are classified in Chapter 59, specifically 5903, because now we have more fabrics that are eligible to be classified in 5903 because they're laminated, even though you can't see that lamination layer. But what does that do to the rest of the tariff? Well, what it does is it takes products from just about anywhere in Chapter 61 or 62 that are made from a laminated fabric with a clear lamination that's not visible to the naked eye. And it puts those in, correct me if I'm wrong on this one, 6113 or 6210. I think I got those numbers right.
Yep.
And those classifications are for knit or woven garments that are made with fabrics that are classified in 5903. So there's no mention of this in Chapter 61 or 62, but because the notes in Chapter 61 and 62, or the headings in Chapter 61 and 62, refer back to fabrics that are classified in 5903, and that definition of 5903 is changing, you've got this ripple effect where because 5903 is changing, all of a sudden that means products that are classified in Chapter 61 or 62, just about anywhere in those chapters, could now be classified in a different heading in 61 or 62.
And the big upshot of that is most classifications in 6113 and 6210 have lower duty rates than their equivalent versions, perhaps in 6104 or 6102 for, knit jackets and shirts, or, pants of 6204 that might be woven. So there's a real duty savings opportunity if you're importing these kind of technical fabrics that are made of garments that are now, or of fabrics that are now 5903.
Okay. Let's see. The next question, is there a software solution out there that I can verify if my HS code is flagged by PGAs or OGAs? Where can I check that? There are some software solutions that are available. I don't know of any that are actively being updated currently. I would say that the best place to go to check on those flags would be to go to your customs broker. To reach out to your customs broker. Do either of you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, not per se. Your customs broker would have that, or other software providers you may be able to purchase. Some of the PGAs, I will say, do announce what things they are placing their flags on. One example that comes to mind for me is the Lacey Act, where if you go to APHIS's website and you look up the Lacey Act, you can find their flagged inventory of things that will require it. So the Lacey Act is one, but with all the dozens of PGAs out there, is there one single place? I don't believe so. That's currently out there now.
Good. There are some private subscription services out there that allow you to look up HTS codes, and not just for the US, but globally, to see if there are any flags on those entries. But personally, I've found the results to be a little bit inconsistent.
Here's another question I like. How will these changes affect any PSCs or post-summary corrections that are still open? Marcus or Adam, do either of you? I can address that if you like. So the changes are with the changes go into effect for the date that is published. We assume that that's going to be January 1, but it may be a different date, and especially maybe different dates in different countries. And so what the person is asking is, if I have an entry from the past where I filed a correction. Let's say that I imported something in October and I figured out that it was wrong, and I decide to file a correction, or post-summary correction, in January. Or maybe I did something wrong in October and I filed a correction in November, but it hasn't been acted on by customs yet. When will this change affect the correction that I filed? And I will say the answer is, in most cases, it's going to be no. And it's going to be no because generally the classification is based on the date of entry or the date that has been selected for entry by customs or by the importer, which is generally around, like Marcus said, is at or around the date of arrival. And so if you make a correction, say 2 months later, the customs will go back and look at the date of the original entry for determining which classification applies, not the date of the post summary correction being filed. Good. Let's see. Here's a question. I'm going to read it as I'm seeing it. Let's see. Will you notify customers when the newly revised HTS codes are published? How will Flexport help us to manage change? Knowing the current HTS codes, will you help to identify the change and what the impact will be to us? So there's a few things buried in there. Will we notify you about the new codes as they're published? Yeah, kind of like what we did with this webinar. Our plan is to continue to get out the message to our clients that there are changes. We're constantly doing that, and we will let you know. If you're a company that's working with us currently and we're clearing customs for you, we'll absolutely be doing that with you, and we'll be doing that with you in various different ways. If we have a quarterly business review with you, we'll be talking specifically about some changes for your products. And that's really the reason why I asked Marcus and the entire working group of brokers to go through and to be prepared to understand these changes, because we know that a lot of our clients are going to be coming to us with questions about how does this affect us? And I want all of our brokers to be educated on what needs to be done. Let's see. Will you help us identify the changes that will impact us? Adam, Marcus, do either of you have any more thoughts on that question?
Yeah, so I know one that we've already worked on already, and that we've at least put through one test, was to take a look at all of our existing clients' database of products and compare that against the affected HTS codes. So maybe the effect is small, right? It's a change in numbering. It's doesn't really have an impact. Maybe it's bigger. It does take a little bit of digging to see which kind of category do I fall into, and which products of mine might have a minor change and which ones might have a more substantive change. So we have been able to identify those products for clients that we already have their existing product libraries for, and we'll be able to provide more detailed information to individual clients based on which products that we currently service, which products are going to be affected.
Great.
Yeah, thank you, Marcus. And in general, we are going to be helping those clients who come to us with their product database, depending on the level of confidence. I think we've laid out what we'd like each client to do proactively to review their classifications. I don't think there's any plan to go out and to every single one of our thousands of customers and say, hey, this is how yours are all changing. As importers of record, we're asking that you be a little more proactive in reviewing your classifications and then trying to map them either through the concordance tables or the document we just circulated, or if you wish to engage us to assist you with that mapping and classification process, that's what we're here for.
Fantastic. Here's another question. I'm not sure if I even know the answer to this one, but I'm going to pose it, and if we don't know the answer, we'll definitely get back to you. Will the new HTS impact processes in filing for duty drawback? I think that's an interesting question. If I import something under one classification, let's say that drone in 8801, and I import it in 2021, and then I export it in 2022 under 8806, how would that impact drawback? Do either of you have any insight into that? If not, maybe we'll reach out. For those of you that don't know, we do have a whole department. Tim Vorderstrass is the head of our drawback department. So we can reach out to Tim to find out the answer to that question, if there is an answer yet. But do either of you have insight there?
I don't.
Yeah, my gut reaction is yes. It could have an impact on substitution drawback. For goods that are considered commercially interchangeable under an 8-digit HTS code, now if you had an old code and a new code, customs, that's going to create a disconnect. So it may cause some issues with your substitution drawback. It's an excellent question.
Yeah, and it's something that we'll definitely look into and hopefully have an answer for you next time. Here's another question. Can we file a post-summary correction in 2022 if entry was cleared prior to the end of 2021 with 6205 heading to change it to 6211 if a lower duty rate applies? I think I understand that question, and I'm going to answer, I would say no.
I
That
agree.
if you import, the product is classified based on the date of import, but there might be some things to do. And so let's say that you're an apparel company and you do men's shirts, and you do men's shirts with pockets at the below the waist. So that opens up a strategic opportunity for you. Can you delay the shipment of any of your products? There's also a window of opportunity here in the US at the end of the year where you can often apply to customs for permission to apply the next year's duty rate to your imports. And so, what I would say is that if this is an issue that impacts you, if you've done your homework and you've determined that there are products whose classifications will change, and that change will result in a lower duty rate, you want to work very closely with your broker to strategically ensure that your products are going to be able to take advantage of the new duty rate. There's things that you can do, like I mentioned, that process. You can also put product into a foreign trade zone or a bonded warehouse if those are available. But there are strategies that you can do to potentially take advantage of that. But those are things that you need to look at individually, case by case. So let's see. We use the HTS codes for both our imports and our exports. So will the list of HTS codes that cannot be used for exports be updated? So there is a small subset of HTS codes in the US that are not allowed to be used for export. In most cases, HTS codes can be used for import or export, but there's a small list. And so the question is, will the list of codes that cannot be used for exports be updated? And I will say the answer to that is, I'm pretty certain the answer is yes. I think the more critical question is, when will that happen? And what happens in the meantime? And that's maybe something for us to think about a little bit is, what do we do in that period of time before that list is updated? I don't know the answer to that. We'll have to dig into it for you. Wonderful. Well, that takes us about to the end of our time. And let's see. There will be an on-demand version of the webinar available that you'll be able to listen to after the fact. We'll send an email, and I believe you'll also be able to use the same link that was sent to you earlier today that you can use to listen to a recording of this webinar. Don't forget to register and save your spot for Forward 2021, our conference that's coming up. You can register by using the link that was sent to you in the public chat. And thank you all very much for joining us. Stay safe. And again, thank you. I look forward to talking to you again soon.